Even before the public knew the full extent of Val Kilmer's health struggles, there were whispers and concerned observations about the changes in his demeanor and appearance. Kilmer, who had once dominated screens with his intense charisma and robust physicality, began appearing thinner, quieter, and noticeably frail. Yet even in the earliest stages of his illness, he was reluctant to disclose the truth. Kilmer's initial denial wasn't rooted in pride alone. It was entangled with his deeply held spiritual beliefs. As a devout Christian Scientist, he believed in the power of prayer and spiritual healing over conventional medicine. For a time, he avoided traditional treatments, placing his faith in divine intervention. But as his condition worsened, he ultimately chose to undergo surgery and seek medical help, a decision that marked a turning point not just in his health journey, but also in his personal philosophy. This shift toward accepting treatment also opened the door to greater transparency. Kilmer began to speak publicly about his cancer, and although he could no longer use his voice in the way he once had, he found new avenues of expression. Through typed interviews, blog posts, and later, the documentary Val, he began to let the world in on his private battle. What emerged was a portrait of a man reckoning with mortality, yet refusing to surrender to despair. In Val, we see not a fading star clinging to past glory, but an artist still deeply engaged with the act of creation. The documentary includes moving moments. Kilmer attending fan conventions with a feeding tube discreetly hidden under his clothing, interacting with admirers with grace and humor, and reading his own poetry, lines filled with longing, acceptance, and the yearning to be understood beyond his illness. His children, Mercedes and Jack, played a crucial role during this time, not only as caregivers but also as creative collaborators and emotional anchors. They appeared in the documentary, offering insight into the quieter, more vulnerable aspects of Kilmer's life that few had ever seen. Their presence added emotional depth to the film, showing that Kilmer's legacy wasn't limited to Hollywood accolades. It lived in his relationships, his art, and the love he nurtured within his family. Friends and former colleagues often remarked on how, even in his most weakened state, Kilmer remained intellectually sharp, artistically curious, and spiritually reflective. The cancer had stripped him of many things, his voice, his robust health, and his freedom, but it could not take away his will to connect and inspire. In fact, the loss of his voice became a symbolic transformation, pushing Kilmer to explore new mediums of expression. He turned more seriously to visual art and continued to write with fervor, documenting his inner thoughts, fears, and dreams. His resilience was not performative, it was deeply rooted in his desire to leave something meaningful behind. That desire infused every frame of Val with urgency and poignancy, allowing fans to witness the profound intersection of art, illness, and identity. As the world began to process the news of Val Kilmer's death, the collective grief was accompanied by a wave of deep respect and admiration for a man who had fought with dignity and lived with purpose until the very end. The final stages of his illness were marked by a quiet strength that spoke volumes about his character. Even as the cancer aggressively returned in the last months of 2024, Kilmer kept his daily routines steeped in creativity. He continued to paint, write, and communicate through typed messages and digital recordings, never allowing his deteriorating condition to stop him from expressing his inner world. Those closest to him say he never once complained about the unfairness of his situation. Instead, he often reflected on how grateful he was for the opportunities he had, the people he loved, and the life he had lived. One of the most profound examples of Kilmer's spirit during this time was his insistence on remaining accessible to his fans. At a time when many would have chosen complete privacy, Kilmer opted for moments of visibility, brief but meaningful appearances at fan events, video messages of thanks, and even intimate Q&As hosted virtually. He knew how much he meant to generations of moviegoers and felt a responsibility to meet that love with acknowledgement. Often seen wearing scarves to conceal his tracheostomy and accompanied by caregivers, he would still smile, pose for photos, and offer signed mementos. These acts weren't out of obligation, they were his way of connecting, of giving back. He viewed the audience not as spectators, but as collaborators in his artistic journey. His final film contribution in Top Gun: Maverick became a cultural moment of catharsis, not only for Kilmer and his loved ones, But for the audience who had followed him since the original 1986 classic, the use of artificial intelligence to replicate his voice was a technological marvel, but it was the emotional resonance of the scene that truly lingered with viewers. When Kilmer's Iceman reappeared on screen to share a heartfelt moment with Tom Cruise's Maverick, the tears weren't just for the characters, they were for the actor himself, a man facing mortality with remarkable grace. The scene captured the essence of Kilmer's enduring connection to his craft. Even voiceless, he could communicate a world of meaning through a glance, a gesture, a subtle shift in expression. After his passing, the tributes extended far beyond. Hollywood's red carpets. Fans around the globe lit candles, organized memorial screenings, and shared personal stories of how Kilmer's roles had impacted their lives. In places as far-reaching as Brazil, Japan, and Italy, theaters sold out showings of Tombstone, The Doors, and The Saint, as audiences gathered to honor the man who had given them so many unforgettable characters. Social media flooded with tribute art, video montages, and handwritten letters to Kilmer. Artists, poets, and writers cited him as an influence not just for his talent, but for the depth of feeling he brought to every aspect of his life, even amid profound suffering. His children, Mercedes and Jack, became the stewards of his legacy, speaking at memorials, sharing archived footage and unpublished writings, and working closely with charities that support cancer research and patient advocacy. Their grief was visible, but so was their pride. They knew better than anyone how deeply their father had suffered and how courageously he had faced each setback. In interviews, they recalled his unfailing humor, his moments of spontaneous poetry, and his constant desire to uplift others despite his own pain. They remembered him not just as a famous actor, but as a father who cooked them pancakes, painted with them, and whispered words of wisdom in the late hours of the night, even when his voice was gone. The industry's tributes were equally heartfelt. Kevin Bacon described Kilmer as a force of nature who was unafraid to explore the strange and beautiful corners of the human psyche. Angelina Jolie, who co-starred with Kilmer in Alexander, called him a soul too big for this world. The American Film Institute dedicated an entire evening to his work, screening a curated collection of his performances and featuring panel discussions about his contributions to cinema. Critics revisited his career with new eyes, reappraising films that had once been overlooked and discovering the subtle brilliance he brought to even the smallest roles. In his death, Kilmer united people, not just in mourning, but in appreciation of a life deeply lived. The physical absence he left behind was immense, but so too was the spiritual imprint he had carved through decades of fearless performance and quiet resilience. Val Kilmer's enduring impact is woven into the very fabric of cinematic storytelling, but perhaps more profoundly into the lives of those who found courage, vulnerability, and a sense of identity through his performances. While his Hollywood stardom was undeniable, what set Kilmer apart was the authenticity he brought to every endeavor, whether it was portraying legendary figures or creating deeply personal art in his later years. His portrayal of Jim Morrison in The Doors was not just an impersonation, it was an embodiment of the rock legend's chaotic genius, complete with haunting vocals and a mesmerizing screen presence. As Doc Holliday in Tombstone, Kilmer delivered lines with such wit and melancholy that the character became one of the most quoted and beloved figures in modern westerns. Even his role as Batman, though met with mixed critical reception, added a layer of brooding introspection that reflected Kilmer's own evolving emotional landscape. What many didn't realize during the height of his fame was that Kilmer was always much more than his on-screen personas. He was a voracious reader, a prolific writer, and a painter whose canvases echoed his inner turmoil and search for spiritual truth. In his memoir, I'm Your Huckleberry, Kilmer offered readers a rare, unfiltered glimpse into his heart and mind, addressing everything from his complicated relationships to his spiritual epiphanies. He reflected on fame not as a goal, but as a byproduct of art done honestly. His poetry, often deeply existential and laced with vulnerability, revealed a man grappling with questions of purpose, mortality, and the divine. His spiritual journey was not linear. It was complex, sometimes conflicted, but always earnest. Kilmer frequently discussed how his illness deepened his faith, challenging him to relinquish ego and embrace stillness, compassion, and humility. The digital tributes that have followed his passing show the breadth of his influence. Fans from all walks of life, young and old, from every continent, have shared how a single role, a single quote, or even just a smile in an interview changed their lives. Online forums, art platforms, and fan pages have been flooded with essays, video tributes, reenactments, and even virtual art exhibits dedicated to his legacy. Independent filmmakers have spoken out about how Kilmer's fearless approach to roles inspired them to take creative risks. Some cancer survivors have credited Kilmer with giving them strength to continue their fight, moved by his openness and his refusal to be silenced by his illness. His legacy, then, is not merely artistic, it's emotional and deeply human. Health organizations have continued to amplify Kilmer's story to advocate for better education and early screening for throat cancer. Experts have cited his experience as a catalyst for conversation, especially around the stigmas that often prevent people from seeking timely help. By sharing his own journey, both the mistakes and the triumphs, Kilmer became a symbol of awareness, encouraging others to listen to their bodies and to advocate for their own health. Some clinics have even launched outreach campaigns in his name, using his story as a powerful teaching tool. In death, as in life, Val Kilmer continues to make a difference, not only through the indelible characters he brought to life, but through the lessons he taught by simply being open, reflective, and relentlessly human. As the entertainment industry continues to reflect on the passing of Val Kilmer, there is a deeper, more nuanced conversation emerging about the legacy he leaves behind. Not just as an actor, but as a symbol of perseverance, transformation, and the unbreakable link between creativity and the human spirit. In many ways, Kilmer redefined what it meant to be an artist in the face of adversity. He didn't step back from the public eye entirely when illness struck. Instead, he leaned in, turned the camera on himself, and exposed the raw, unfiltered reality of life with a debilitating condition. It was a bold act, one that not many would have chosen, especially someone whose voice, his literal and figurative instrument, had been so central to his craft. But Kilmer made a conscious choice to embrace his vulnerability and let it be seen, to make it a part of his artistic voice, rather than hide from it. This openness shattered long-standing stigmas within the entertainment industry, which has often prized physical perfection and invincibility, leaving little room for stories of fragility, illness, or visible disability. Kilmer showed that it was possible to lose one's voice and still communicate powerfully, to lose one's health and still thrive creatively. His documentary Val was not a vanity project, but rather an act of artistic defiance and generosity. It invited viewers into the quiet, often painful moments of his daily existence, while also celebrating his relentless passion for storytelling. He didn't ask for pity, he asked to be seen as he truly was. Wounded, yes, but also wise, open, and still deeply alive. This act of courage has inspired countless others, especially fellow performers who have faced physical or mental health struggles, to reconsider what it means to be visible in the public eye. The authenticity that defined Kilmer's later years also casts his entire career in a new light. Looking back, it's clear that even in his earliest roles, Kilmer gravitated toward characters who were complex, contradictory, and deeply human. He rarely played one-dimensional heroes. Instead, his characters were often charming, yet conflicted, brilliant, but burdened. From the razor-sharp intelligence of Doc Holliday to the mercurial charisma of Jim Morrison, Kilmer injected each role with emotional depth and ambiguity. These weren't just performances, they were excavations of the human psyche. And even when he played mythic figures, he found a way to ground them in reality, to make them feel lived in and psychologically rich. Kilmer's own life mirrored the tension and richness of his roles. Off-screen, he was known to be intense, passionate, sometimes difficult, but always driven by a deep commitment to his principles and his art. He was someone who questioned the world around him, who pushed boundaries in his work and in his personal philosophy. Spirituality was a guiding force throughout his life. His Christian Science beliefs informed many of his decisions, even controversial ones, such as initially delaying medical treatment for his cancer. While some criticized those choices, Kilmer later spoke candidly about his evolving understanding of faith in medicine, acknowledging the importance of balance and the wisdom that suffering can bring. He never presented himself as perfect or infallible. On the contrary, he embraced contradiction, saw value in questioning, and welcomed growth. That sense of spiritual searching colored much of his post-diagnosis work. Kilmer didn't just want to act, he wanted to explore and convey deeper truths about life, death, and the soul. His paintings, often abstract and symbolic, revealed a man who was reaching for the ineffable, trying to capture emotions and ideas that words alone couldn't express. His poetry, filled with metaphors and references to mythology, love, and loss, became a window into the inner landscape of a man, confronting his mortality with unflinching honesty. In interviews and public appearances, he spoke often about forgiveness, about letting go of resentment, and about the beauty of surrender. He was not afraid to weep, to laugh at himself, or to speak about love and death in the same breath. In a culture that often shies away from such rawness, Kilmer's openness was a gift. His final chapter, then, was not a retreat from the world, but a bold re-entry into it, on his own terms. By returning to the role of Iceman in Top Gun Maverick, Kilmer didn't just reprise a beloved character. He reclaimed his voice, quite literally, through the innovative use of AI technology. The scene was brief but powerful, a tribute not only to his past but to his ongoing journey. It allowed him to say goodbye on screen in a way that was authentic, dignified, and deeply moving. Audiences around the world wept not just for Iceman, but for Kilmer himself, for the man who had been so many things to so many people and who had given so much of himself in return. Now, in the aftermath of his death, Val Kilmer's presence is felt in ways that go far beyond traditional memorials. It lingers in the subtleties of his performances, the rhythm of his voice immortalized on film, and the vulnerability he dared to display in his later years. Film retrospectives are being held around the globe, not only showcasing his most iconic roles, but also celebrating the full breadth of his career, including the lesser-known indie projects that highlighted his experimental side. Critics and audiences alike are revisiting his filmography with fresh eyes, appreciating the layers he brought to each character, the nuances that perhaps went unnoticed in earlier viewings. His ability to shift between genres, comedy, drama, biopic, action, without losing his distinct essence, is now being studied as a masterclass in versatility. Beyond the screen, museums and art galleries are beginning to exhibit Kilmer's artwork, a rich and emotive extension of his inner life. His visual art, often abstract and deeply symbolic, communicates themes of identity, transformation, and spiritual seeking. Many of his paintings and mixed media pieces were created during his battle, with cancer giving them an added poignancy. They stand as artifacts of his resilience and a visual diary of his emotional and physical journey. Critics and fans alike are now seeing these works not as side projects but as vital parts of his creative legacy, evidence that his artistic voice found new channels when others were closed to him. The renewed interest in his personal writings and poetry has also become a significant element of his posthumous recognition. Collections of his written work are being published and re-examined, giving readers a glimpse into the philosophical and introspective mind behind the Hollywood facade. Kilmer often wrote with raw emotion, blending humor with sorrow, existential musings with grounded observations of everyday life. His words echo with the depth of a man who had seen both the pinnacle of fame and the depths of despair, and who chose to articulate those experiences with honesty and grace. In addition to artistic tributes, real-world impact is being made in his name. Foundations dedicated to cancer research, particularly throat cancer, are being organized, with his story serving as a driving force for awareness. These initiatives aim not only to fund medical research but also to provide support for artists with disabilities, those who, like Kilmer, face physical challenges but remain committed to their creative pursuits. His story is now being used in public health campaigns to educate people about the symptoms of throat cancer and the importance of early detection. Health organizations are highlighting Kilmer's experience as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope, encouraging others to seek medical intervention when needed and to find strength in vulnerability. Friends, colleagues, and fans continue to flood social media and public forums with tributes and memories. Personal anecdotes are emerging, on-set stories of Kilmer's dedication, behind-the-scenes glimpses of his humor, his generosity, his moments of introspection. Many speak of his brilliance, but also of his kindness, how he remembered crew members' names, how he offered mentorship to younger actors, how he brought intensity and care to every collaboration. These shared memories are collectively painting a richer, more human portrait of the man behind. The roles? Ultimately, Val Kilmer's life and death have become a powerful, evolving story of transformation and transcendence. His journey reminds us that even in a profession obsessed with youth, perfection, and appearance, it is depth, sincerity, and artistic courage that endure. His physical transformation due to illness was stark, but it mirrored an even more profound internal evolution. He moved from being a guarded, enigmatic star to a man who fearlessly opened himself to the world, scars and all. In doing so, he showed that true legacy isn't found in awards or accolades. It's in the lives you touch, the truths you tell, and the vulnerability you dare to share. His death marked the conclusion of his earthly story, but not the end of his influence. In many ways, his final act, as a creator unafraid of change, as a person willing to confront mortality with honesty, may be the most inspiring chapter of all. It serves as a guiding light for those who feel voiceless, broken, or afraid to be seen. Kilmer taught us that even when stripped of the tools we believe define us, the essence of who we are, our soul, our art, our spirit, remains. In this, he gave the world something rare, not just entertainment, but enlightenment. Val Kilmer's legacy continues not in echoes of his past, but in the living heartbeat of his story, still unfolding.